Thank you for tuning in to No Sudden Moves Radio. And remember, stay on the proven path so you don't risk falling behind. Here at Business Legends, we don't overthink it. Look around and see what everyone else is doing. If it's working for them, it will work for you.
Welcome to Wait It Out, where we believe there's no reason to act now. The opportunity will still be there when the timing is better.
The age of disruption isn't coming, it's here. And the boldest move isn't following the crowd, it's following your why. I'm Patrick Ledden, and you're listening to Disruption Lab. Hello and welcome to the Disruption Lab podcast. My name is Patrick Ledden. This show is all about thriving in a world that doesn't stand still, a world filled with change, challenge, and you got it, disruption. Whether you're leading a team, launching a project, or navigating your own career path, disruption is part of the journey. The question is, how do you lead through it? My guest today has spent her career helping leaders to do exactly that. Liz Wiseman is the best-selling author of Multipliers, Impact Players, and the Multiplier Effect. She's a researcher, executive advisor, and CEO of Wiseman Group, where she teaches leadership to some of the world's top organizations. Liz is known for helping people understand how to lead in a way that makes everyone around them smarter and more capable. In a time when disruption is everywhere, her insights are not just useful, they're essential. Hey, Liz, welcome to the Disruption Lab.
It is good to be here with you.
It is good to see you. It's been a few years since we saw each other last. Before we hit record, folks, we were talking for a few minutes, just kind of catching up. And Liz has been a pretty busy person the last few years. But Liz, some folks know you, some folks don't know you. Would you mind telling a little bit about yourself?
Okay, well, let me see. I am a researcher who has, and I suppose an author, a researcher and an author. I do some executive coaching, advising, and I have come to my work as a research, having spent the first half of my career as a corporate leader. I spent 17 years at Oracle. I was thrown into management as a child, in hindsight, way before I should have been, and got thrown into a pretty senior role pretty young. And so I have spent my whole career trying to figure out what good leadership looks like. One, for myself, just trying to be a decent leader. And then the second half of my career is really studying that, trying to help leaders at large, lead in ways that bring out the best in other people.
When you talk about getting thrown into it, as much as we talk about disruption, sometimes people think that, oh, it's a negative thing, right? Like I was trying to do this and something got in the way, or I had a health scare, or whatever it might be. But many times disruptions can be very, even at surface level, positive things, but they nonetheless kind of throw us off our path a little bit, or cause us to stumble or struggle, or even just take a moment to reflect. I would imagine getting thrown pretty early into some of the leadership roles, maybe more in hindsight, but I don't know, maybe even the moment, did you see them as like, these are big disruptions? I'm being asked to do some big things.
Well, certainly. I mean, I was aware when I was asked to take on a management role. I think I was not even 25 years old. I'm just like a year and a half out of graduate school, and Oracle wants to build a university, and they asked me to go build that and make it work in like 100 and something countries around the world. And I'm thinking, do they not understand that it's only about a year and a half ago that I was at a university? And like, this seems like an adult job. And I feel very much like I'm still a child in the workplace. And, I think I had to ask, like, do we lack for adult supervision here? And I've always been keenly aware that I was in over my head. And I think because of that, I ended up doing a research project and a book on this called Rookie Smarts, because I came through this always feeling like a rookie at my job, always feeling like my responsibilities were bigger than my capability. And it wasn't this imposter syndrome. It was more like, okay, I've just got thrown into something I don't know how to do. So how do I figure out how to do this? And it always put me in this learning mode that ended up, I think, working in my favor. And that's what I really went to study. And I found that, when we are doing something that is new, important, and hard, like when we're at the bottom of a learning curve, disrupted, we tend to do our best thinking and our best work. Not always. It starts really when we're aware that, like, I don't know what I'm doing. And it tends to prompt us to do all the things that companies are trying to get people to do, like ask questions, be curious, seek feedback, consult other experts, reconcile, process, make sense, you know, pivot. And we don't take these big risks and big leaps because we're too uncertain to do that. We tend to like do this kind of MVP, minimum viable product. Like, let me try this, let me experiment. These like little tiny moves and pivots, finding our way, which allows newcomers to often outperform people with a lot of experience.
That makes so much sense. I was actually just talking to somebody a little bit earlier on today, and he said about he got a phone call one time, and the phone call was like this really cool opportunity, but at the same time he was kind of going like, should I even take this? Because I don't know if I can do this thing. You remember he talked to his wife. She's like, give it a go. Well, what's the worst that could possibly happen? And he dove in with the kind of that rookie mentality. He wasn't brand new to the work world, but he was definitely brand new to this thing. And he said some similar things, even from his N of one experience in regard to he started getting into it. And he's like, figuring out how to deal with failure, figuring out how to work his way through something that maybe nobody else has really tackled recently. And just that whole process of doing, he found it was such a valuable like push for him, even at a mid-career level.
Yeah. I've any success that I've had in my career, I can probably attribute to what I call the naive yes. And it's not naively saying yes to every opportunity, every request. It's saying yes to hard things, new things, things you don't know how to do, saying yes before your brain kicks in and tells you you can't do it.
Yeah.
When I wrote my first book, people were like, "What? Had you had a lot of experience with that?" I'm like, "No, I had never written anything longer than an email note before I wrote my first book." And the reason why I figured it out was not because I was particularly bright or gifted with words. It was that I signed a contract and said I would produce a manuscript. And I'm like, well, I guess now's a really good time to figure out how to write a book. And I started asking people, and I remember asking my publisher, like, tell me about your favorite authors. And what do they do differently than other people? And like, I remember asking, like, in your experience, what's a good business book like?
Yeah.
Like, what's the criteria? And she's like, nobody asked that. I'm like, well, maybe nobody's as desperate as I am because it was a new world for me. I had been a corporate leader, and I think it was saying yes. And I really encourage people to practice this naive yes, and then kind of like say yes and then figure it out while you're doing it. And not only because we tend to do good work in this space, I think we tend to feel um, alive in this space, maybe even joyful in that
Yeah.
space.
I think that's such a critical thing when you talk about asking questions. So earlier on in my career, I worked at KPMG Consulting, and I was kind of taught there a bit about, don't ask quote unquote stupid questions in front of a client. The idea that don't ask them a question that they've already told you the answer to, or don't ask a question that, your colleague already knew. That's why you need to have a second set of ears in the room. But in general, it kind of caused us to shrink sometimes, or at least me to shrink sometimes, because I would then have to go out and try to figure out the answer to something that I probably could have gotten in just asking the client in that moment. And it probably would not have come with a whole bunch of judgment from them either. They probably just answered it and went on with their day. What have you found about folks, even like yourself, like kind of leading a little bit with your, like putting your chin out there and saying, all right, I'm gonna ask this question, not knowing what's going to come back from me. I mean, how do we wire ourselves even to do that better, do you think, so that we can ask those questions? Because I think there's probably some rookies out there that are afraid to ask those questions.
Well, I certainly wouldn't recommend people ask questions that you could figure out
Yeah,
on your own.
yeah, exactly.
By looking at the website or doing, a little bit of work with AI or search, you should be able to find those answers, not fact-based questions, but more like questions full of wonder, like why are we doing this? What does success look like? Who is really served by this? What would happen if we didn't do this? What's most important to you as you do this? It's that kind of sense-making questions. And I feel like you've asked a good question when someone stops and says, I haven't thought of that before, or that makes me question things. Like it's asking the challenge questions. And this is really getting into the space of the disruptor.
Hmm.
And I think, you know, we tend to, do well in this rookie space, not only because we're fast, but because we question things.
Yeah, I
And,
remember. I remember reading about soldiering years ago in the old studies that were done, like on management research. And they talked about how they would, somebody would come in and maybe they had the energy and enthusiasm of somebody due to something, but the organization or the employees with the organization would kind of stomp out that enthusiasm a little bit. They'd want them to soldier along. Have you learned much? And I'm thinking about Rookie Smarts too. As when I read it, I was thinking about like how do I maintain that level of energy or not diminish it in somebody else when they bring that kind of enthusiasm to it.
well, we find that there's sort of a golden spot and it's about 6 months that people tend to be like at their most valuable in many ways in terms of disruptors in their first 6 months in a role. And then we start to soldier on, fit in, stop questioning things. And if you want to maintain that vibrancy and freshness, you can either try to coach yourself to do it and coach your organization, or you can just keep mixing things up. And I find that the best way to stay in this mentality is to kind of just build your work experience around a series of those kind of first 6 months,
Mm.
and keep, I don't know if it's moving the target, moving seats.
No, that makes absolute sense. I was talking one time, Patterson and I were talking on the book as we were working on it. We're like, how do some people see disruption or kind of what's the limiting mindset? And there's a lot of folks that, and I probably have had this at times too. It's like, I just want to get past it. I just want to get around it. I just want to avoid it, whatever it might be. But then as we started researching it, we started seeing time and time again, people who were hitting disruptions in their lives, like we all do, or in their work and the value that comes from it. So in your work with leaders and teams, have you seen certain types of disruptions that really help those people perform at higher levels? Things that can shake them up or shake up the organization that actually does cause that higher level performance to start to pop out?
Mm. Well, I don't know that I know the answer to that because I haven't studied disruption
Hmm.
per se. What I feel like I know about is what leaders do to help people work through disruption.
Yeah.
And I also know what the most impactful contributors do and their orientation to disruption. And let me maybe start with
Yeah,
some
please.
insights I got from studying that. So I did a study a few years ago. The book that came out of it is called Impact Players, but I studied the impact players of the workplace and contrasted the smart, capable, talented, hardworking people who were doing a fine job versus smart, capable, talented, hardworking people who were doing an extraordinary job and making an extraordinary impact. And when I looked at the differences, so again, it's not a study of high performers and low performers. They're all solid performers, but some of them are far more impactful than others. In many ways, they're getting more impact for every hour they spend working. And what I found is that the ordinary contributors, they were people who were great at their job. They followed direction. They were team players. They carried their weight on teams. They were goal oriented. They were focused. They took initiative. And as I looked at that profile, I thought that looks pretty good. In many ways, that looks like the ideal team player.
Hmm.
But what I began to see is that the ordinary contributors were absolutely stellar performers, stellar teammates, stellar contributors on team, in ordinary times. But once things started to get messy, once the situation had a lot of ambiguity in it, disruption in it, uncertainty, the ordinary contributors tended to fall short. Their way of working, their way of thinking fell short. And these were the situations that the impact players handled differently. And there were five in particular. They were what I called messy problems. Problems that don't fit neatly, they don't line up to the org chart. It's not really this department's charter or that department's charter. It's not your job. It's not, their job. It's just that stuff that kind of sits in the middle of our work streams and org charts, like problems without clear owners.
Yeah.
Or opportunities without clear owners. The second was unclear roles, where we're clearly collaborating and you need many minds, but you just can't figure out who's in charge. And it's like who's in charge of this project or this initiative, or just like who's in charge of this next 60-minute conversation. The third is unforeseen obstacles, where something you couldn't have planned for or predicted, sort of drops in your path. The fourth was moving targets, where the environment's changing, customer needs are changing, budgets are changing, that feeling of shooting at a goal box and it's moving while you're shooting at it. And then the last was unrelenting demands, where the workload is increasing faster than the resources to do the work is increasing. And the common thread across this is uncertainty and ambiguity. And these were the situations that the impact players handled differently. And it was funny, as I was kind of going through the data and these five scenarios kind of emerged from the data, I thought, wow, this is like every lunch conversation I have with one of my buddies in the corporate world. They're talking about one of these problems.
Yeah, no doubt. Absolutely.
Like, oh, well, we're kind of at a standstill because, we're waiting for role clarification. And you hear people talking about these, and I thought these are the situations that aren't going away. I call them the everyday challenges of the modern workplace. And, if you leave one job because you're frustrated with these and you go take a job like at a competitor or down the street or a different industry, or you run halfway across the world, like to find a more stable environment, you're likely going to find these same problems elsewhere. And what we found is that the impact players tackle these differently. They think about them differently. They act differently, but fundamentally what they do is they move toward them rather than away from them. They go into them.
Mm-hmm.
Much like, when there's, well, maybe let me share a different example. Our family went on a trip to Vietnam, and we were in a huge city, and we had to cross this intersection. It was one of these like 5-lane intersections. There's just like cars, motorcycles going constantly. There's no lights. There's no crosswalk. And we kind of came to this stop, and like we're waiting for traffic to clear. And our guide said, "Oh, traffic's never going to clear. Like
Yeah.
this traffic is going to be buzzing through this. I can't even really call it an intersection, all day long." And he said, "Let me teach you how you do this here in this city in Vietnam." He says, "You just walk out into traffic and traffic will flow around you." And we were like, surely this can't be how you do this. But, our young son, he was probably, I don't know, like a 10, 11, or 12 at the time. He's like, man, I was born for this. And he just goes out. It was terrifying as a parent to watch this because traffic's going fast, and he just walks out into the intersection and like everything just flows around him. And this is kind of this mentality of the most impactful people. Is like, you know what? I can't sit back and wait for all of this frenetic buzz to clear or to stop. Like it's not stopping. I just have to go out into it and kind of like, I don't know, be at flow with it. It's like diving into the oncoming wave rather than like waiting for the waves to stop.
So I would imagine that there's people listening right now. They're like, yeah, you're rattling through the five. And they're like, in the last 2 weeks, I've been in conversations about all of these things. So the question then becomes like, what do I do? Because hey Liz, is this just like I was born with it or I wasn't, or can I figure out how to walk into that wave and how do I learn to be comfortable in that ambiguity?
Well, I don't know that we're born with like a strong ability to or not be able to cope with this, but certainly our early life and early career experiences give us a propensity toward
Yeah.
it and an orientation towards ambiguity. And it is certainly one of the things we find is the hardest to coach. Um, Maybe an obvious takeaway based on that is if you want people on your team who are really good with navigating through disruption and change and chaos, like hire people who are comfortable in ambiguity. And it could be as simple as some behavioral based interviewing of like, hey, tell me about a time that you dealt with a really ambiguous situation and how did you handle it? I gave that challenge to one of my buddies. Um, and he was hiring a bunch of people and he needed to have people who were really comfortable. And so he asked that question. And what he was looking for, it turned out, wasn't so much their answer and what they did. Some of that is helpful. But he said, I noticed the body language that certain people were like, oh, yeah, let me
Mm,
tell you about this. Like we were dealing with this situation and like they're moving away from, he said, the people I ended up pursuing like additional interviews with and then hiring were people who kind of leaned into it. Like, oh yeah, let me tell you about this. Like here we had all these players, the goals kept changing, moving. Here's what we did. Here's how we navigated. They found it, I don't know, interesting, invigorating, like, and it's a willingness, I think, to just sit in the presence of ambiguity long enough to find opportunity that overwhelms our natural sense of threat.
yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. I was talking years ago, I was talking to my dad. I just saw him this past week. So he's fresh on my mind. He's 93, he's almost 94 years old. And he worked for the phone company for 38 years. So 38 years in the phone company. I'm sure he had plenty of disruptions he dealt with in his life with customers and growing family and all those type of things. But when he talks to me about like what I do in my career, sometimes he's like, "Well, how do you do that?" Or "Why would you, it's like it's like another world to him sometimes." And um, I'm sure that his work would be other world to me too. So it's not like one thing's better than the other; it just kind of is. But I remember one time years ago, I just said to him, Dad, I think I just thrive in ambiguity." Is actually how I said it to him. And I was like, I don't know where it came from. I don't know why it is this way. I know I started my career in the military, which was there wasn't a lot of ambiguity, at least in the day-to-day type of thing. But ultimately, for whatever reason, I just started to feel comfortable in recognizing that I don't know the answer to this thing, but I'm gonna, as you said, kind of lean into it and try to figure this thing out.
Mm.
And I considered it to be quite a blessing that my life has kind of unfolded that way. I don't know how I would operate otherwise, but I'm just curious. And when you think about people who you see that struggle with this sometimes, um, how do they get better? What can they do to get better? Because although it might be informed a bit by their childhood and their upbringing and their early on experiences, there's got to be some degree of hope that says, okay, here's some ways that you can navigate your way through some ambiguous times.
Mm. Well, let me offer two thoughts on that. One is like borrowing from exposure therapy. Like,
Yeah.
ambiguity to a lot of people is like, ooh, a spider, snake, yuck. I'm not, but exposure therapy acknowledges that we have like a natural fear and a natural aversion to certain things. But in exposure therapy, like your job is not to like handle it and wrestle it. It's just to be in the presence of something that's scary. And I think it's a really good first step, which is um, to to be able to sit long enough with something that we start to get more comfortable with it. The thing that seems unknown, scary, I don't have answers. It's like you sit with it long enough and you're like, oh, this isn't as bad as I thought because we are we are hardwired to be afraid of the unknown. Like the evolutionary biologists would tell us that our brains are going to keep us out of situations that are unknown. But the way to trick our brain is to just stay with it long enough that it starts to feel a little bit familiar, a little bit comfortable. So I think that's one of the ways we could trick ourselves into being better at this. the other, I'll share sort of my approach to it. I can't say I thrive in ambiguity. I actually like, given my druthers, if I'm going to choose like a situation where it's like constantly changing, uncertain, ambiguous, or one where there's clarity
Mm.
and structure and organization. I'm going for clarity,
Yeah,
structure,
as you're
and
saying that,
organization.
I think, I told my dad I thrive in ambiguity, but one of the reasons I feel like I can do that professionally is because there's other things in my life that are structured and have some certainty to them. I would imagine if I said everything I thrive completely, swimming in a sea of ambiguity, I'd probably be like, no, I'm not. It's just there's certain things that I know are, so it gives me the freedom maybe to move around a little bit in it.
Well, I think, Patrick, in that you've just shared with us another route to be good at this is to like have parts of your work in your life. It's almost like creating bands where you're like, okay, I have some things that are certain and packaged and I know about, and those give me confidence. So I think that's a great strategy as well. Here's my strategy. It's like, yeah, given my druthers, I pick structure and uncertainty. I can cope in ambiguity, but my value add and why I tend to be good at it is not because I like it, it's because I hate it so much. And what I'm good at is taking things that are foggy and uncertain and like tidying them up.
Hmm.
Like I'm an idea cleanup person. Like I can take in a bunch of like mess and junk and go, okay, like let me put some bounds around that. Let me clump that. Let me structure that. I tend to put order to disorder. So I actually like ambiguity in so much that it gives me something to put order and structure around, which is an incredibly valuable skill to have in an environment where everything is changing. And it might be as simple as, a team meeting, which is like, okay, we're trying to figure out what's going on with, things in the economy. What are we doing with tariffs? What are we doing with there? And like everyone feels like the world is spinning out of control. There's so many unknowns. You could play this role of, okay, well, what do we know? Or like what's kind of common across these things, what we can be certain about. And you can play this role of putting structure where there feels like there's no structure. So there are
Yeah.
many ways to navigate disruption and uncertainty, and you don't have to love it. You don't have to thrive from it to thrive in it.
Yeah, it's funny. During COVID, particularly, we saw leaders who would do this, what you're talking about, in that they would provide a degree of certainty around something. So I know there were a lot that would start the 2 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon meeting. We're going to hold that no matter what. That's the thing we can control in the midst of all this. Or I'm going to send out an email every Friday and just like straight up tell people kind of what's on my mind and what I'm doing as a leader. And there were certain things that were like these ports in a storm that leaders were able to provide their people that I can't count on anything else, but I can count on this ritual happening or this particular practice happening. Are those do you find, and I'm sure you do to some degree, find that type of behavior as a leader, not only like encouraging people and allowing them to take risks and fail, but at the same time providing a degree of stability?
Well, I think that is kind of the leader's number one job in disruption is to provide enough stability that people can then go and tackle this. Like one way to do this is, to get your arms around a lot of uncertainty by saying, okay, there's a lot of unknowns.
Mhm.
What are the things that we actually don't, what are the things that we don't know right now? Okay, and you make a big list. Okay, but what are the things that we do know? And you make a big list. And it's one of this ways of creating stability that serves as a counterbalance to the instability. But like by just parsing this out and making a list of things that you know versus things that you don't know, like by making this list, and you can do this as a team, you can do it just yourself for coping. It's like, okay, there's a bunch of stuff we know. This helps us build our confidence. It creates the stability. It's like, okay, we're not going in here knowing nothing. We know a bunch of stuff.
Mm.
That's for confidence building. And then the list of things we don't know, that is not to unsettle us as much as it creates the learning agenda. Like, okay, now I know the things that we don't know that we need to go out and figure out and learn. And when you do this as a team, it establishes the learning agenda. But you've created the confidence that people are willing to step out of the known and into the unknown.
I love that. I love the idea of, especially as a team, having that conversation, as opposed to, it's one thing for the leader to have it in their own head or even write it down for themselves, but for the team to get together, whether it's a team of, actually like an executive team of leaders or a mid-level team of leaders or a team of team leaders or just a team leader with their team. And I don't mean just in like a negative sense, but just it could be something like that, is the idea of like, let's all wrap our minds around this together and see if we can't get some shared understanding of reality right now. I think that's really beneficial.
Well, it is. And I think kind of backing up, I think the job of leader has fundamentally changed. And I want to roll back to maybe where we started our conversation. I
Yeah.
get thrown into my first leadership job. I have no idea what I'm doing. There's a bunch of us that don't know what we're doing. I organize a training program and I bring in this outside speaker. And I will never forget this. We were actually meeting up on the 11th floor of the Oracle 500 Parkway building, which only has significance to people who work for Oracle. But if you work for Oracle, that's where Larry Ellison's office was. And we
Okay.
were just down the the corridor from his executive office, and we're meeting there. It's a big conference table, and this consultant, he said, your job as a leader is to lead people to a better place. And I'm like, okay, that kind of makes sense. And he said, your job is to extend the hand of greatness.
Hmm.
I'm like, He says, and like to say to your team, like, take my hand and I will lead you to a better place. And the reason why I remember this so much, Patrick, is he jumped up on the table, on the conference table. And he was kind of a big, tall guy. And he's like reaching down, like, take the hand of greatness and I will take you to a better place. And I thought, well, first of all, like, Larry's probably going to walk by and wonder, what are we doing in here? And and then I thought, this can't really be right. And now, fast forward a few years, and I'm absolutely convinced it's not right, because this model of leadership, like this, take the hand of greatness, and I will take you to this place that I know about, like, it's built on a faulty set of assumptions. It's built on this assumption that the leader has been to this place before and knows the way and can take people. It's almost like, I'm going to descend from on high
Yeah.
and I'm going to guide you to where I have been. Well, like, what leader right now is leading their organization to a place that they have been before?
Great point. Yeah.
No. And in fact, I was just talking to the head of an organization just a few days ago, and he goes, yeah, I'm trying to lead people to a place I've never been. And most of the challenges we're dealing with, the leader hasn't been there. So the job of leader isn't, like, I'm going to take you to a better place. It's more like, I'm going to serve as your leader and I'm going to guide us to a place that none of us have been before. And I don't know where we're going. And I don't know how to get there, but I know we can't stay here.
Mm.
And it's almost like the images I get are like scenes out of I don't know, thriller action movies. And they usually feature people like The Rock or, Dwayne Johnson. And it's like something terrible and catastrophic has happened. And it's like, okay, we've got to get out of here and, like, follow me. They don't know where they're going, but they know it's not safe to stay.
Yeah.
But you trust that, you know what, I think they have the skills to help us navigate. And then the job of the leader is, one, to have built enough trust that people are willing to follow you out into the dark, out into the unknown, and then to build a learning capability and to get people talking to each other. And the image I always get of this is like a special ops team. The Rock could probably star in that one as well. But it's like, a team is going in for some sort of special ops. Maybe they're going to rescue hostages or something. And they kind of know what they need to do, but there are a lot of unknowns. And the way they, of course, they establish like a mission and intent. but no one person knows enough to carry out the mission on their own. And they are talking to each other like, okay, I've got eyes on this. Okay, road closed here. We're going to need to exit here. We've got, enemy fire over here. And they're talking to each other, trying to in real time gather intel so that they can carry out their mission. The commander doesn't tell people what to do. They get people talking. They're building collective intelligence and learning, but they've built the trust
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
get there. And I think that's a lot more what good leadership looks like in times of disruption and change.
I so agree. And I so appreciate you sharing that today. And that idea of somebody standing up on the table saying, come with me. Like it was funny. I was doing an interview the other day and somebody said, oh my goodness. And the time we hear the word disruption thrown around, which it is being thrown around a lot right now, but like, this is the perfect time for this book. It could never have been. And I'm like, if I put this book on the shelf and brought it out in 10 years, they would say this is the perfect time for the book on disruption. I mean, because it is constantly changing and dynamic. And coincidentally, Liz, the next episode of this podcast that comes out, I interview Matt Eversman, who was in Mogadishu when back in '93. He was one of the people that then became a character in Black Hawk Down. And he talked just about that. I already did the interview, but it'll be coming out soon. He talked just about that, the idea of like we came in and we knew the general intent, we knew the general what we were supposed to be doing, but once once things started getting a little get crazy, and the next 18 hours that followed after that, it was leader to team member to team member, talking and trying to figure the way through all of that because planning only gets you so far sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's, I always think of this image of like leading in the dark, and these special ops are often done in the dark, but they have like night vision goggles and, technology that allows them to talk to each other. And I think, the best leaders recognize that people feel like they are in the dark. And how
Mhm.
do you shed light on it? It's not by saying, I have an answer. It's more by saying, okay, there's a bunch of things we don't know.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer. We're got to figure this out together. It's like, how do you create light? If like light is maybe a metaphor for knowledge, intelligence, insight, like your job is to let like light come out of the darkness.
Oh, that's such a great way to say it. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. It was good catching up with you as well before the recording, but more importantly, it was great to have you on in the conversation because I know that people that are listening to this podcast are dealing with disruption, are thinking about the changes facing them, are finding a lot of curveballs coming in direction, are trying to find their way through the darkness sometimes. And just, I think also the idea that when you share the idea that like, hey, you're not the first person or the last person, i.e., the listener or any of us having to grapple their way through it. And, recognizing that if I can just lean in, learn, trust people, build trust with people, and in the process, just kind of keep moving our way toward, the next outcome, the next whatever it might be, that's really so beneficial. So thanks, Liz, so much for joining us today.
Patrick, it's totally my pleasure. And congrats on the book.
Oh, thanks so much. Well, folks, that's a wrap for today's episode of the Disruption Lab. A big thanks, Liz, to you for sharing your perspectives, your research, and honestly, your heart. Whether it's learning to be a multiplier, becoming an impact player, or leading through complexity, Liz helps us see what's possible and gives us the tools to get there. If you found today's conversation valuable, share it with someone else. Grab a copy of Liz's books. Better yet, grab a copy of every book in triplicate and share it with your friends. They'll benefit from it as well. That's all I have for today. Thanks so much for joining me. My name's Dr. Patrick Ledden. Now go make it a great day.